Boombox time again then. These always seem popular. This is another one for a customer that I've done a model previous for. This is a Hitachi TRK-8080. According to the service manual, these went into production about 1978, and it's definitely got that kind of late 70s. I always find it slightly sort of military look to them. Quite a stout unit. Like a little bit of chrome detailing and everything around the speakers there. Looks pretty cool in black. I love the contrast of the black with the brushed metal trim on the top. On the top we've got a really nice tuner dial and 2 analog VU meters, and generally looks in pretty good shape. Of all the ones that I've seen of these online, I find it's very common that the front perspex for the tape door tends to fog up. It seems to be a reaction against ultraviolet light from sunlight. Some I've seen are worse than others, so that can't really be cleaned out because it's kind of in the volume of the plastic. Yeah, it looks in fairly good shape. I'm going to give this the works, and I've got a belt kit on order that should turn up later this week, and because I expect that's what I'm going to have to do. There's a little scratch just in the front of the tape counter here. That's the only sort of major really bit of damage that I can see, but there's a little bit of rusting on the speaker grills, so I think we might try and have those out and see if we can clean those up, possibly even paint them or something. I'm not sure, we'll see. Yeah, I'm going to have the deck to do and everything on this. I just noticed actually it's pretty cool that it's got a sticker on the side, the mark of safety, the kite mark on there. I'm going to ask him if he wants me to keep that, because if he does, I have no intention of removing that. Yeah, generally very clean, but he's told me, yeah, it just wants the works. I thought there were a couple of paint marks on it, but they're not. It's actually little bits of polystyrene from packing, because he shipped it down to me and it was it was really well packed. So let's plug it in and see what it does and what it don't. Okay, AC power lights on. We have turned to radio there. Let's just turn it to tape. They have kind of an air damped eject, which is a little bit creaky. Maybe we can make that a little bit better. Absolutely no movement on the take-up reel at all, and no movement on the capstan either, and it's making a horrible noise. So we can hear the motor running, but we've got no run on that at all. So let's have a look at that. 2 antennas look in good condition. They've both got the black ends on. Probably won't pick much up here. Now that woofer's not working. I remember him saying one side works, one doesn't. I can hear the tweeter working, but that woofer's not working. Just going to flatten the tone controls. Okay. Got a bit of a sticky band switch as well. It's not quite going to long wave. Not that there's anything there really anymore, but even Radio 4's going off the air this year apparently. Tuning dial and power lights are working, and I can see one light above the meters. I don't know if there's supposed to be, oh no, there is another light at the other end. So I can see 2 lights. I'm not sure how many there's supposed to be. We'll find out when we open it. We've got a line in as well. We'll test that later. But definitely that woofer's not going at all. In mono, stereo or wide, nothing. Well, let's put those back down then. I'll get the back off it. We'll get a towel down. It only just fits in shot, doesn't it? So, first thing, look in the battery compartment. We'll need to do the sponge as always. But other than that, immaculate. No sign of leakage or anything there, no bother. So, looks like 8 screws. Don't remove those 2 from the cabinet because they hold the antennas in as they're marked. Let's see if we can get this off. Okay, that put up a little bit of a fight. So, as always, don't just rip the back off because the Hitachis like to mount the transformer on the back panel, so there are wires connecting. And have a look. Yep, 4 antenna wires and 3 power wires. So let's see if we can remove these connections here. So, got a yellow one at the edge, then a black one, and then above the ferrite rod there is a white one, which is on there pretty well, and then a black one just curled around next to that. Okay, then switching around, this is a little bit cheeky, so there's one that actually pulls off the board here. Instead of being on the main board, it's actually plugged into the back so I can see the connector. So we have a red wire that's connected there, and then the other 2 wires are connected down on the main board. So we've got a red and black pair there. So there's the red, goes to the bigger capacitor, the black goes next to the smaller capacitor, and I think that's everything. So, just to cut in from the future here, the arrow points to a black wire that goes into the front cabinet, and that actually connects to the AC power indicator LED on the front. If you remove the chassis from one of these from the front cabinet, you have to disconnect that wire. The red wire that I've just disconnected from the back next to the transformer is the other side of that LED. On this main board, this is erroneously marked as red on the screen print. You can't plug the red one into that because the connector's different, it won't fit. It should actually be this black wire. I had to go back through the video footage when I was putting this back together to figure out why on earth it said red when it should actually be the black wire. But yeah, it's a mistake on the screen print, so don't let it catch you out. It's a little bit more complex. So there is that red wire. So I massively overexposed this just so I could get the light in it. There's that red wire on its own that connects into the board at the bottom of the back panel by the transformer. So you can hopefully see there's quite a bit of muck in the bottom of that, so that will be original. So it's been really nicely cleaned outside. There is a ground wire, I'm noticing here, that goes to a spring that grounds the metal panel on the top. You can see the tuning cord down there, and I think this is much like, yeah, this is much like the previous TRKs that I worked on, in that a chassis comes out. Again, we've got plastic linkage coming from the function switch that links this big bar to a slide switch, and then we've got a couple of long slide switches here. These will be for the record and play. In fact, it says R&P. I'm seeing a few 9s on a couple of chips here, So that makes me wonder if this might be 1979. There's an 8 on this Panasonic chip down here, so it could be a 1979 build. We have a few connectors, very likely come from the tape deck. One there, and then one here that probably comes from the arrays head, because that's screened. It's got AC bias, AC arrays. There's a few plug-on connectors here. 2 Hitachi chips down here, which I think will be the amplifiers, because they've got heat sinks on. And a couplet here, kind of early integrated circuit, just a bit easier to see, a little bit flatter. There's a couplet there. There's sort of an integrated circuit that probably does something like the FM demultiplexing, or does it have Dolby? Don't think it does have Dolby. Sometimes you find things like that will do Dolby. It might be something to do with the FM tuner, or it might be some kind of op amp. So let's get the chassis out then. We'll need to take all the controls off the top. There's always one. It's coming. There we go. And the tuning dial. Okay. They're in pretty good shape. There's just some slight marks on the tuning dial there, but we'll give them the usual clean, a little bit of a polish, but overall they're really tidy. Externally it's generally quite nice, just internally it's a little bit mucky, and we need to take care, of course, at the tape deck. Just being stubborn. What is it? It's holding it. Needs to be removed. Ah, I've got it. Okay, I think there's some plastics and some wiring that was stopping us. So this is sort of interesting in the construction, that the tweeters are mounted to the chassis, but the woofers of course are mounted to the actual front casing, and the tape deck I think is mainly accessible from the back. It's pretty mucky, so it's probably not been opened before. That might be again why the wiring was so tight, and why it put up a bit of a fight to get the chassis out. You have to be real careful when you're doing these. You don't snag your fingers on something like the tuning needle. So easy to break. He asked me about cleaning the tuning dial. Yeah, I can see there's some muck on that, so I don't see any marks in the paint or anything. It looks really nice condition, so we'll very gently clean that, just make that as nice and bright as possible. The actual window on the front, apart from a little bit of muck inside, I can feel that. Again, just wants a clean, but I don't see any scratches or dings in that. That looks really nice condition. We'll see if there's a way we can make this balance, and then I can get the vacuum around this first, I think, and get some of the dust out of it. The felt looks in nice condition. There's a little bit of muck underneath. Out of interest, this was the woofer, wasn't it, that wasn't working, and I can feel movement of it on it, so I don't think it's bound up. But let's just, out of interest, check the resistance just to see if it's open or not. It might be. Getting meg ohms on the reading. I mean, the amplifier will be connected to it, but that don't seem right, does it? I just wonder if it has got an open coil. Yellow and black wire. Let's see if we can find it. Disconnect the yellow wire. We'll stay there again. Meter back in. No, I'm not. We may have a blown speaker there. That coil, appears to be open. That's a shame. It would be nice if it was just the wire that was broken off the terminal, wouldn't it? I don't think it is, you know. No, I was wondering if that was loose at the back. No, it's definitely going into the paper. But with an open coil on that driver. Completely open. We're going to have to find a driver for it then, aren't we? Okay, I've desoldered the faulty speaker, and a bit of good news, the grill is just held in by the pressure of the screws from the speaker, so these grills are really easy to get out, so that'll be really easy to clean. And if they do need any kind of paint, then it's not out of the realms of possibility. As for the driver, what's amused me, I don't know how well that will come across on camera, but the dust cap is really wonky. That was stuck on a Friday afternoon, definitely. It's hilariously off centre. That is a sort of, it's almost like a fabric dust cap, and I have seen models of these with chrome dust caps online. I have a feeling that is exactly the same woofer as is used in the 81 and 8290s that I've previously worked on. And if you've seen the previous video on the 8190, I think it was, the one where I dyed the cones with ink, I do think they might be the same driver. I have possible availability of a pair of those. I might investigate that. I think we'll have the other speaker out. There's a wire here that goes to the AC, what is that, the AC powered indicator that will connect into the main chassis somewhere. Need to undo that. I think we'll have the other speaker at the chassis, then we'll be able to wash this all out, all inside. We have a good day for weather today, so I think today will be a good day to separate the chassis from the casing. I'm also going to desolder this speaker, because these wires are, although they're plugged in on the board, they're kind of snaked through a couple of tie wraps and a couple of bits on the chassis itself. It's just going to be easier to desolder these speakers. So of course the broken one's already been done, and this one, the orange wire, goes to the positive lead. So on this speaker we've got a black and a yellow wire. The black one goes to negative, and on this speaker we've got a brown and an orange wire. The brown one goes to negative, and that red wire that I'd unplugged, that I thought actually came from the battery or something like that, it doesn't. It actually comes from the AC indicator on the front, so we've got the black wire still plugged in here. But once I desolder that speaker, of course the tweeters are on the chassis themselves, so we don't need to desolder those. Once I've desoldered that woofer, unplug that, I think, yeah, the ground strap has been undone, so the ground strap's there for the top casing. I think that's all the wiring, all the connections to the front casing. When we've done that, we'll unscrew the soft eject mechanism. That'll probably pop the front door off, and then I can take this outside and give the bottom half of this a wash. I've done a preliminary test on the dial just to check that the cleaner I was using wasn't going to affect the paint, and you can hopefully see there, yeah, there's a hell of a difference. It's amazing, sometimes you look at these things and think, it doesn't look that bad surely, and you can kind of feel a bit of the muck on there. Then you just get the cotton bud in the stuff, and yeah, look at that. So when the time comes, we'll be going over all of that. It may be feasible, if you're doing one of these, to actually unclip these and remove the dial, but the two meters are stuck to the back of it, so it's not really worth removing it. I'll be able to just clean around it, no bother, because it's fully exposed anyway. So let's put the iron on, get those wires off and get that done. Chassis away, dearie. Whenever you clean a tuner dial, always test the edge with whatever you're going to use before you go all over the face of it. I used a degreaser spray, which I've used before. I used on that Sony that I did a few months ago, and that stuff really seems to cut through the film that you get after, you know, 45 years of of use and of that much muck being in there, and then I finish it off with window cleaner. So I think next thing is going to be to get this tape deck out, and according to the service manual on this one, you actually flip the circuit board up and then you go in from the back, so the transport itself doesn't lift out like the 81 and 8290s, for example, that we worked on previously. Doesn't work like that. The board is on little clips that you pull back and then it can come out. Let's see, it comes loose like that. There are a couple of screws and a couple of bits, so again I'm going to go through the manual and just double check what I do and don't need to remove. I've also got plastic linkages that one should slide straight out. This one I'm not so sure of. I think we might have to remove it from this screw here, and then that should expose the board. The ferrite rod is bolted to the board, so as long as we're careful with that, that can stay. And ideally I'm only going to flip this up this way, and I don't think there's anything, no, there's nothing here. Lots and lots of wiring, but again hopefully we're not going to disturb that too much. I might just have to loosen this sort of tie wrap here and then bundle that back up at the end. We'll see how we go. There's one here as well, but I'm aiming just to flip this way to get our access to it. So so there are some connectors actually that need to be removed. This one's got a little retaining clip and it's really close to that ferrite rod, which is a bit cheeky. So actually that has to be removed. I think we will have to undo this bundle. Yeah, I'm going to have to loosen these. So these tie wrap things are reusable, which is nice. So those bundles we're going to have to undo. But snakes under those orange and brown wires. That'll be from the playback head. RP there. So what's confusing here is there's a switch assembly here. Wow. Okay. It looks like I have to remove the 4 switch tops, which just pull off. Which are there. And maybe I can pop those 2 screws back in then. So we have a red pair of wires here that go to P18 on the board, and the striped one is nearer to the jacks here, and the red plain one is at the opposite side. I think they are kind of in the way. With a red, black and blue connector in the middle. I think I'm going to have to undo more than I expected to get this out. I was kind of hoping it would be simpler than this. Stuff trapped in a clip down here. Okay, that's ready to move. This switch thing here is really frustrating. It's weird. If that wasn't like that, I don't think we'd have half this trouble. There's kind of an extra board soldered on, and then there's 2 pegs that go through it. It's weird. Another vote for why didn't they put it on a connector. These wires to the meters we need to be careful of. Ah, I think we've got it. Okay. Some of this is a clip here. A lot of the wiring's a bit snared up, so I think all that is going to have to come out as well. That's better. Alright. So with a cover here that's clipped in, it just pulls out. That's it. There we go. Right, so I can see Definitely a piece of capstan belt there, stuck around the flywheel. Doesn't feel gluey, but it feels soft, and it's obviously stuck around the flywheel. The motor, yeah, that's starting to turn to goo. So I think because it should have been in the first place, it's time for gloves. I think the board's just going to balance there for now. So fortunately, because most of this is intact, it doesn't look like the belt path on this one is too bad. That's obviously the counter belt, and that's as dry as an Arizona afternoon. And that one will be a take-up belt, and that's, yeah, not much left of that. That's starting to go sticky, and then it looks like we've got a fairly straight path for the capstan belt, the remains of which are stuck to everything. So it looks like that must have gone, I think that might have gone above. Looks like we'll take those two screws out there. Brilliant. Okay, so it's on top. Interesting. So this is actually not too bad to work on, it seems, once you get this board out, which if it's a new machine, like as this one was and it's all tied up, that's quite tough. There is a lot of plastic going on here, and reading through a couple of others, we've got a date stamp there, at least a 79. I've seen it on a couple of capacitors as well, 1979, so I wonder if that's 3rd of July 1979 maybe, or 4, maybe a batch number or something, don't know. That's cool. Anyway, where was I? I've seen a couple of other people have a go at these and have trouble with some plastic parts, so I'm going to have to be very careful there. I mean, on first inspection it all looks okay. We'll give it the usual clean, pick all this off the motor. Capstan's free to spin. I'll probably take the retainer clip off the front of that. No, it feels fine. That seems reasonably smooth, but I think I will take the retainer pin off and clean all that, oil it and refit it. Clean up this motor, because I can see bits of the belt are making the way under this plate, and make sure the bearing in that's running okay. Feels alright, but that's turning sticky, so yeah, let's get gloves on and crack on. Okay, so far that's gone really well. The tiniest bit of residue was left on the motor pulley, but it pretty much came off in one piece. Around the flywheel, I managed to get that off and then just clean off the remainder with a bit of acetone, and the rest of it I'm going to do with alcohol. I am a little bit concerned that there are rubber idlers on these two wheels here. They might be hard as nails. I'm going to have to see what condition those are in, because if they're knackered we might have to seek replacement idler tyres. We'll see how we go, but at least the cleanup on this has gone well so far. Do excuse the traffic noise while the windows open as I'm using the alcohol. I'm also having one of those days where it's just really hard to speak. I keep having to restart each shot because I just keep flubbing what I'm about to say. I think it's just tiredness. I think from here on this video is just going to be go fix the tape recorder. No, cleaned it. It's better now. I almost don't say this because I'll probably jinx it, but I looked into buying cotton buds online, on eBay and whatnot, in bulk, because I go through so many. And it turns out by a country mile, the best deal I can possibly get is sticking to what I do, which is buying them from Asda in boxes for 50p. I can't beat that deal, which I was really surprised at. I thought they'd be making a massive markup on them, but don't let them know before they go up to £3.89 for a box or something. But yeah, 50p a box, and I really like these Asda ones actually, because they've got this, they call them safety buds, where they've got the long tip at the end and then this sort of bulbous bit, because the long tip's really good for doing stuff like this, but you need to poke it in. and the wider bit is really good for if you want to use it flat to clean something, because it soaks up a lot of liquid. Yeah, I find really good for that. So there's a lot of residue in here. It's not sort of sticky, but I often find you get this kind of powdery build up where belts have gone dry, and it's good to get all that out. Got a gear there that seems in decent nick. The rubber for the motor mounts I think is okay. It's probably hardened a bit, but we'll see. I will drop some oil down under the pulley in this motor. I'll let it sit overnight. It certainly feels alright, as does the capstan and flywheel there, but again that's going to be pulled and oiled. But for now I really just want to make sure the grooves of all these pulleys are good and clean before we go anywhere near any of the rest of it with fresh belts. Overall it isn't bad at all, it's just I don't think it has ever been opened. So there's just 45 years of gunk, but I don't think it's been owned by a smoker or anything like that. It's certainly not full of tar, it's not, from what I can tell, been left in a damp environment or anything that quite often they have. Seems it's been quite well taken care of. Certainly the outside condition of it's testament to that. So it's really just first time it's been opened, get 45 years of crap and dead original belts out of it. It must be said that the condition of the boards and everything is really good. I don't see any corrosion in traces, don't see any leaking capacitors, I don't smell any leaking capacitors. I don't smell any of that sort of musty smell that something has when it's been, say, stored in a damp environment or dumped in a garage. No mould. I don't see any signs of corrosion on the metal. It's been really well looked after. If anything, I'd say the board actually has a smell of kind of almost like shoe leather, like it's been kept in a dry environment, and probably what it smelled like when it was new. Doesn't have that sort of must to it at all. So yeah, I think this is an example that's been really well cared for and really well stored. The actual cleanup of the transport was minimal, and I'm going to probably do some rubber treatment on these tyres. I think they look in good shape. I think they're alright. They're probably just a bit hardened. Looks like we've got brake there, and yeah, I'm going to loosen that down and just check those. Then when we've done all the cleaning and left the oil overnight to sort of settle in, then I think I'll get the belts on, finish cleaning up all the chassis and everything before I do, and try and get this back together. Probably get some voltage on the motor and just see, then the front will want cleaning. And then we need to source a second speaker, don't we? While I have a little bit of time, I'm in the process tonight of just doing some lubrication and rubber restoring work on the Hitachi mechanism. Second time I'm shooting this, because I went through a description of how some of this works, and then when actually in the process of doing the lubrication and kind of operating it, I realised I got most of it completely wrong. So these two brass wheels here, one's covered up by a little bit of glare, but you'll see what I mean in this middle one. Both of these form clutches. So this one, when it has the belt going round like this, that is the take-up clutch. So the outer pulley, the plastic pulley, can move while the brass part actually drives a shaft right through. That forms the take-up clutch. And then this one in the middle with a rubber tyre around it, this forms the rewind and fast forward clutch. So there is a gear wheel underneath, you can probably just see turning there. When you put it in, what's that? That's play. And when you put it in fast forward, that directly drives the take-up wheel. But if I stop the brass wheel in the middle, it's still moving the tyre, but it's not moving the actual take-up reel, because that's what forms the clutch there. So at least it would be moving the tyre. There we go, it's moving the tyre that way. If the grip was a bit better. You can probably see it now moving the tyre, but not moving the reel itself. If I let go, it turns again. So that forms the clutch for that, so that when it gets to the end of the tape, it doesn't just stall the motor. And then when it's in rewind, it drives the rewind wheel, but again does the same thing. So you can see the rubber tyres moving, but of course the take-up reel's not. So I've got to restore some grip, which I'm in the process of doing to this tyre, so that that keeps a consistent grip against the pulley that's at the bottom of the flywheel here. And the actual clutch does the clutch part, because you don't want parts in a tape recorder to be forming a clutch that aren't supposed to be a clutch. If they're supposed to grip, they should grip. This rubber wheel on this one just seems to be a brake, actually, because there's this little white piece here that when you come out of an operation will stop and pull up, and not very strongly, but kind of touch this rubber wheel around the supply reel to stop the tape spilling out, I guess. So again, that probably would have been a bit stronger when it was new. I think we'll do a bit more rubber restore on that, just see if we can get a little bit more grip back. I don't think it's necessary to try and replace them. I think they'll be difficult to find for a start, this sort of diameter of idler wheel, but I think this one, for instance, is not going to be that critical as a brake, as long as it works well enough. These are a bit more critical, I would say, but they're in good shape. There's no dings or holes or chunks out of them. They're not cracked, in which case you'd have no choice but to replace. And this one, I found the trick to get into this one is to jam it through the top like that and actually turn it from underneath. So it's quite a bit of muck and dead rubber coming off that, but hopefully that will restore a bit of grip. The other thing I did was mainly through this metal bar at the top, especially the pause control, I've put a little bit of oil on these just to again just reactivate the grease that was there, and a tiny bit down. Anywhere I can see metal against metal, any sliding mechanism, I've just lubricated a little bit, because when this starts to jam up here, it tends to make the pause mechanism in particular kind of sluggish to release, so it'll sort of do that instead of popping back. A lot of these I've seen with stuck pause buttons, and it's and the ones with the buttons at the bottom as well. I've seen a few Hitachi models with stuck pause buttons, and it's always dried grease that makes them bind up. But this is all working really smoothly now. So last thing I want to do is, as I've said a few times, get this flywheel out, lubricate the bearing on that, and then if I'm happy with the condition of the rubber, then I think we can start getting the new belts on, then get power to the motor and just see how it all moves. Okay, let's do the belts then. So this is a set from Deck Tech, not a sponsor, but the usual supplier. So the three that we've got in that set, there's one that's quite thin, I think that will be counter belt, a square section one that's a bit thicker, which should be take-up belt, and the flat section belt should be for capstan. So in terms of order, I think we actually do the counter belt first on this, because it's the lowest down, and the board is flopping and not helping. Maybe better actually to get it round to the other end first. Yeah. This flywheel is a little unusual in that it doesn't have any kind of flange on it. The motor pulley does, but the flywheel doesn't. So to make sure that's running central on the pulley, which it seems to be quite happy there. And then I think it's supposed to be that way. That's right, because that should put pressure on the wheel that way. So put that into play. So after doing this and putting power to this, like that by the way, everything's moving okay, almost. I've taken off that idler tyre because those two idler tyres between the reels are identical. These unfortunately are just too hardened and just too shiny, and this clutch assembly is not working properly, which means I think I'm going to have to get under this, take the flywheel back off. I'm going to have to replace these, I think. I have found a source of them. They're £7.50 a piece. I suppose they're custom made, but the sizes are right. About 25.5mm diameter roughly, 2mm diameter width and 20mm internal. So it will fit the reel tables. The rewind one is alright. It feels much better than these two, and there's just enough torque there for that to work. So I don't think we're really going to have an issue with that one. It's a shame because that one's way easier to change than this one right down here. But and this one again, this is not a critical one, so that's going to go back on, but I just took that off as the easier one to get to measure. Don't think I can turn them inside out either, so I think the insides, I'm not even sure if it will turn inside out. Sometimes they do, but it looks quite shiny inside, but it just feels like hard plastic. Just to show what the issue is here, I've got a tape in the mechanism, of course power to the motor. It's playing right to the end of the tape. It's just going to the leader now, I can hear it. Right, see that stopped, but the brass pulley's still moving. The auto stop works, which is cool. But the brass pulley should stop and the outer pulley should keep going, because the brass pulley should transfer motion to the take-up reel. So this is where the clutch should be. So to simulate that, if I put a bit more pressure on this reel, see how it stops? That's what should happen, which means that tyre has no grip on it. There's a little brass shaft underneath this pulley connected to this brass top piece. See, that's what should happen. That should act as the clutch. That little shaft presses against that rubber tyre when this is pushed forward. You can see it pushes in, but it shouldn't be spinning like that. It should be gripping and it should stop. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of voiceover here for this part because I was making loads of noise with this bubble wrap. I got hold of a spare parts machine and it's in really rough condition, which is why, apart from the good weather, I decided to do this part outside. This came from a house clearance dealer and it looked like they'd just taken it straight from a shed, wrapped it up and just posted it straight to me in the exact condition it was found. So it was full of all kinds of animals, alive and dead. And yeah, I didn't really want this in the house, especially at this stage. So here we are unpacking it all. Yes, pretty crusty, pretty rusty. That'll be the jammed stopper jack button. Oh, interesting. Never knew that came off. It's broken on the back. The first thing I want to do is pop this door cover off. There is some scratching and stains down the back of this, but the first thing I want to do is clean this, and I want to compare it with the other one. And wow, this bee or wasp, whatever it is really interested. I want to compare it with the other one and see if there's any potential to polish it, because it might be not as fogged up as the other, and I might be able to spruce that up and make it look better. There is quite a deep scratch there. That's a shame. I was kind of hoping that would be a cobweb in the picture, but no, I think it's a scratch. There's a lot of corrosion on the top, corrosion on the controls. Sponge is just powder. Actually not too bad. You can see a bit of speaker there, and it doesn't look rusted, which is good because that's the bit we want. Okay. First impression, yeah, there's a couple of cobwebs, a couple of bits, but it's actually better than I expected. Right, let's disconnect all the necessary. Well, that came out a lot easier than the other one, so this probably has been worked on before. There's remains of some kind of animal on the bottom of this one. Some rust and corrosion a little bit around the motor, not masses. Broken post. So it's dusty, but a little bit of glue there. But it looks alright, it's quite tidy. The back will clean up a little bit. Just some muck to brush out of it, and that broken post to get off. That. Let's get a brush. Oh, there's a live one in it. Yes, I can see the remains of a few animals. And one that's still alive. I'm also going to clean up the grills because I want to try and experiment with these, as this is a sort of scrap machine. I want to try and experiment in sanding and painting these. Ultimately what I'd love to have is to have them powder coated, but I think there are some powder coating places near me that do sort of automotive stuff, but I don't know if they bother with anything this small. So I'm going to try painting them. I'm going to try it on these first as a tester, so they're going to want the corrosion removing and then probably sanding, and then we'll try it on them. There's no dents, just especially from the sides, very rusty. So get those cleaned up, get that cleaned up, test it and see what it's going to be like against the other speaker. I might even pull both and see what both of them are like, because I might end up dyeing the cone on them. We'll have a think about that. Is it obvious which is which? One's out of the first machine and one's out of the second, cleaned up. That one's the one I've just cleaned up. I think once they're behind the grills, assuming they sound the same, I don't see why they wouldn't, I think that might be alright. The reason I'm debating inking them is because these centre caps they're a kind of translucent fabric, an acoustically transparent kind of fabric, and they're not paper, so they don't fade in the same way as the paper does. If you look right down, it may not come across on camera, but if you've ever got one of these, if you look right down at the back of the cone, underneath where the dust cap is, just where it connects to the spider at the back, and I mean the actual spider of the speaker, not a spider that's been living in it, this little orange bit with the folds in, that's called the spider. If you look there, you can see the kind of original colour, because it's been completely protected from all the sunlight, and it's a very dark grey, and it always gets a lighter grey on the back where you get a little bit of dust and some of the ultraviolet penetrating from the front, and then on the front you get that kind of browny pale grey colour where the ink starts to fade and the kind of natural paper pulp colour starts to come through. Around the outside on these, they're coated with a kind of rubbery coating that sort of protects the surround, stops it from tearing, I guess, and makes it a little more pliable. So it's a little more, I've forgotten the word, I'll put it in on a tag on the screen, that makes it a little bit more that. And yeah, because these are black centres, you're not going quite for that contrast with the chrome centre like you are on the others, so the sort of really dark cones on the ones with the chrome dust caps look really good, but on these I think you might lose a little bit of that contrast when the grill's in front of it with that dark centre. So I'm not sure I am going to dye these, just as an experiment. This is the one, red cross on the back, that's dead. It's also the one that's got the wonky dust cap on it, so it's a scrapper. So let's just try the inking thing on it out of curiosity to see what it looks like. It's the next day, and what I've been doing here is soaking the grills in citric acid, basically a whole box of citric acid dumped into this Quality Street container of water, and I've left them for about 24 hours. And by using a brass brush afterwards, I've managed to get the corrosion off. I mean, the citric acid's dealt with the corrosion, but also most of the paint as well. This one, for some reason, the one that's actually in the tub, if I put the gloves on, the paint on the back of it is really sticking way more than the other one, even though they're off the same machine, which is quite weird. But it's actually a steel brush, but it won't matter. It's really tough on the back of this one, but on the front I have managed to get the majority of it off. But the key sort of takeaway of this is that I want to make sure all the paint inside the holes comes out, because if that's left behind, that's going to affect the next coat that goes on. So it's really got to be right, but it's worked, yeah, pretty well. I'm really surprised that I'm not able to get that off the back on this one, but the other one did. I'm hoping, this might want a bit longer, but I'm hoping that I can really get these to come up well. And then I've got it's barbecue paint, stove paint, that will be hopefully really hard wearing for using directly on steel, and it's not glossy, because a lot of metal paints, have a glossy finish. These don't originally have a glossy finish, and I want them to look original. So if you were so inclined, you could even leave them you could leave them silver, but they don't quite match the kind of brushed aluminium of the rest of the unit. They're a little bit more kind of bronzy coloured. You wouldn't be able to tell that by looking at them on their own, but if you compare them with the aluminium on the unit, yeah, they don't quite match. But yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's managed to cut through the paint like that, because it gives me a way better surface for prep, for putting the new paint on. So after doing some comparisons by putting the drivers in the front face of the cabinet, I've definitely decided to ink them. I'm going to do them all, especially after comparing some original print advertisement and such, especially in the Japanese market models. If you look back to the original colours, I'll put some examples on screen of what I'd found. They definitely look much darker. They never look like this, they're never brown. And I think just the way that has dried, it just really freshens them up every time. They match better, they just look so much neater. So I'm going to go for it, I'm going to do them all. And also, I'm going to do the dust cap as well, because when I did this first one, I didn't do the dust cap first, and actually made it look lighter. By not doing it, it looked really scruffy. So because it's, as I mentioned earlier, a kind of fabric in a way, it takes the dye just fine. So with the dry one in the middle, you hopefully get an idea once they've dried how they look. Alright, bit of a shuffle about my work day today, so I'm going to work on the Hitachi for a bit. Now I've got the tape doors from the proper machine and the spares machine, and hopefully it will come across there if I can kind of get some of the glare out, that one of them's quite foggy and one of them's quite clear. This is the proper one, this is the one from the spares machine, and it's unfortunately quite scratched on the front side, but the back side is great. But it's very clear compared to this one, which is not scratched, but yeah, it's got that fog that we can't do anything about. I think this one is a closer match to the tuner glass on the proper machine, so I think I'm going to try and resurface this one. I've got some wet and dry paper, and then I've got some really fine grades of paper, and the plan is to use one of these little dent puller things. I actually got a couple of these a few years ago for pulling the glass off the front of an iMac to do an upgrade on it. But what I'm hopeful I can do is stick one of these on the back and close it, and it will hold it for me to be able to rub it on the sandpaper on a flat surface. I'm going to do it on my bench so that I can attempt to refinish this front and get these scratches out. So I'm going to take a little bit of the plastic down and hope that that is going to do it. So I'm going to have a go at that. Alright, that was a lot of effort. It's not perfect. The old one's not perfect either. But I mean, I can definitely see that once it's kind of up against the black background of the actual machine, the one that's clearer is just going to look so much better. And like I said earlier, I think the clearer one there is a better match for the tuner dial on the top, because the tuner dial is quite clear. The tape door's more fogged up than the tuner dial. So I'm going to be quite happy to just finish that off a bit more, and that's going to go on the front of the better machine. And I did get a bit of a ring around it from using that suction thing, and a couple of little scuffs on the back, but I managed to sort of polish most of that away, and crucially it didn't affect the screen print on the back there, because I was worried about scraping or rubbing that off. So that's been fine. I think that will look really smart on the front of the proper machine. Alright, so the inked speakers are in, the painted grills are on, and the refinished tape door from the scrap machine is on. This is all just for a test fit. I'm going to put this all aside and work on the chassis next, but this is looking great. That, as I mentioned earlier, is a way better match for the clarity of the clear plastic of the tuner dial. So it's really improved the presentation of it. Really happy with how the speakers look. You can still see the dust caps, but they don't look kind of brown and faded like they did. The paint on the grills has had 2 or 3 days to harden. It's never going to be as hard as a powder coat would be, so you'd have to be careful if you ever did this that you don't scratch them. But of course you could just go through the same process to recoat them, if repaint them, you know, if you ever needed to do that again. But I'm really glad I went through with that. There's no kind of rusty mark or anything showing now. If you kind of look down the side or anything, it just flattens the presentation out, just makes it look really fresh, and really kind of ties it together with the rest of the black trim. So I'm dead happy with that. So I'm at the point of doing some work on the chassis and checking of the electronics on the 8080 here, and I've got the scope and the dummy load wired up to the outputs from the woofers, because that blown woofer was concerning me a little bit. It's the first boombox I've worked on where one of the coils was actually open, and it made me wonder if there was any issue with the amplifier. So I wanted to put it on the dummy load and check it on the scope, put the bench power supply on to power this, and just see if there's any issue with oscillation or DC offset or anything kind of untoward that might have blown that speaker rather than someone just turning it right up. And I've been going over this, and it's probably picking up classic FM or something at the moment. I've got a clip lead antenna just on there. The tweeters, of course, are mounted on the chassis, so they're still in circuit, so you'll hear it. But the main thing I'm noticing, I'm not seeing any DC offset issues or anything really. The only thing I've noticed, if I crank it right up, one of the channels will cut out, and I think it's just the pot. I think it's just these pots are quite crackly, and if it's turned down very low, there's very little gain on the left side, so the right side comes in first, so the pot's not quite balanced. So I think we've just got dirty pots there. The actual balance pot itself, that seems to work quite well, but they will all get cleaned. Bass and treble, again, if I turn treble right up, it's very crackly on the right side. If I turn bass right up, I can see clipping there, but it's certainly no oscillation or offset, so I don't think we've got an amplifier fault. I'm comfortable with that. So I think it's just a bit of basic maintenance, but I did want to check it, considering the fuss that I had to go through to get a set of speakers. You know, I didn't want to put another set in and just blow it immediately. Even with the volume right down here, 100 milliamps being drawn at 12 volts there. If I put the lights on, it peaks at about 220, 230 milliamps. So no wonder there's this extra space here where they thought we better not put a third bulb in it, because the consumption would have been through the roof. The first thing I want to do is try and get in and clean these pots, and apart from the balance pot, which I think in circuit will just shift the ground between left or right to cancel out the opposite channel to the one you're selecting with the balance. The other three are dual concentric pots, so they do have a stacked pot, one for each channel. I think that's why, especially in the sort of treble one, when we turn it right up, it's crackly in the right but not in the left. Meters are all working really nicely, and I think I've got one as a tune-in meter at the moment, yeah, and one as a battery meter, and if I drop the voltage on the power supply, it will drop appropriately on there. So that is working fine. Just going to set it back to 12 volts. So I think it's just basic maintenance from this point of switches and pots, and these are not the easiest to get access to. The balance pot and the volume pot are not too bad, because there's just room underneath. I'll get a better shot in a minute. There's just room underneath to get likely the straw from a spray can in, just to give them a quick spritz. But the bass and treble pots are a little bit blocked off by some capacitors in the sides, so I might need to get a bottle topper with a needle on it to really kind of get in there and just drip a little bit in, because I think the spray straw won't go through the gaps. I think the gap's too tight, and I don't want to just hose it all over the place. So I might have to put a little bit of the cleaner in a little bottle, put a needle topper on it, and just kind of get it right in there to clean those. Even if you take this bracket off, I don't think it's going to give particularly better access. I'm not sure, I might try that. I think all the switches seem fine. I'm not noticing any crackling issues with like loudness switch or any of the other switches. These are quite well made switches, and they're relatively well sealed against the elements in a way, but the fronts of these pots are somewhat open, so I'm definitely getting a little bit of crackle off that. So we'll do the basics on that, and then I'll do the long switches. I want to do the band switch especially for the radio, and then see how that improves matters. Alright, hot tip. I couldn't find the needles that I've got for the bottle. Couldn't find the bottle either. But get a little bit of heat shrink that just goes over the straw on this. Heat one end of it so it kind of closes it up, then clamp it with some pliers to flatten it, and then you can get right between the long pins at the front. You can just see there, you can get between the pins of the pots way easier and direct it into the right place. So we've got rid of all the issues with the bad balance. It comes up evenly, doesn't cut out at the top of the scope anymore. Treble doesn't make it crackle at the top when it's right up. And the grease on this one was a little bit more seized than the other, so I just put a tiny bit, just dripped a tiny bit into there just to ease up the grease a tiny bit, and it's way better now. They feel a lot more even. The balance pot will always feel lighter because it's only one pot, so it's only one wiper. These of course are dual concentric, so they'll always feel a bit heavier. But it's all working much better now. So yeah, you don't need to disassemble it. If you put a little bit of heat shrink on the end of a nozzle like that, then you can get to it pretty well. Okay, hopefully we can get everything back together today. I've cleaned all the switches. I've been running a tape through it, a couple of tapes actually, checked all the alignment and checked the outputs and everything, checked the DIN outputs on the back. The tape deck and the circuitry in this machine are fairly simple. I was surprised that even kind of going through the service manual, there aren't really any electrical adjustments on the tape deck. You can't even adjust output level. They just go straight into the op-amp circuitry. But it all seems fine. The speed is pretty good. There's possibly a speed adjustment behind this sticker, because there is a hole in the back of the motor there. I can feel it under that sticker. But it's pretty good. I don't want to mess with it really, but it isn't even mentioned in the service manual. There's lots of adjustments for the radio, but for the cassette deck it basically says just check all the tensions. Doesn't mention how to adjust any of them, just says check all the tensions are within spec, and you can adjust the recording bias, and that's about it. Yeah, I was kind of surprised at that really, but I guess a 1978, 1979 cassette deck on something like this, or in a boombox like this, they're going to be more bothered about the radio and the FM stereo really, which is why I think we've got things like the RAF switch, it's that one, as they call it, for adjusting the bias oscillator frequency if you're trying to record from AM radio. The fact that a control like that's so prevalent, you know, it's on the top of it, kind of dates it pretty well. But the other thing, I thought I'd got a faulty switch. I think it's this switch. I think it says underneath, yeah, tape type. So this is a tape type switch that will select between normal tape and chrome tape. And normally when you've got a switch like that, it's an EQ switch, so the playback EQ will shift. It'll go duller when you switch it to chrome, and it didn't do anything, made no difference at all. I thought it was broken. And then again, looking at the service manual, this is only a recording switch, and it just actually affects the bias. It just affects the bias level. It doesn't actually affect the playback at all. So the playback EQ and even record EQ is fixed slightly at 120 microseconds. So it doesn't, unlike every other tape deck I've ever dealt with, it doesn't make a difference despite it being labelled normal and chrome. It makes no difference on playback. So I thought it was broken. It's not broken. It only affects recording. Did a quick recording test. It does work. Another weird thing about this is if you are recording from the internal mics and you've got the volume on, it immediately feeds back. It's really strange. It doesn't mute its own speakers when you're recording, unless you're recording from radio or you break the connection on the back with the mic inputs, or probably with the DIN socket as well. I guess you can record. I should try that. You can record from line input. Has no manual recording level. I think a later model did add provision for a manual recording level, because there are actually slots on the board there and slots in this felt where there would have been sliders. I've seen that on the Japanese model. I think there was a Mark II. But yeah, it's relatively primitive for something, you know, it is of its time. And the subsequent models like the 81 and 8290, for example, that I've worked on, really kind of up the game in complexity of and performance really of the tape deck and everything. So there were much more adjustments and controls and such on those. But yeah, it all seems to be working really well. The wind on the clutch tension that we worked on is really nice and smooth. As I say, it's run a couple of tapes through, no problems. I've tested it through the headphone output and it sounds pretty good. So I think I'm going to start just finishing this off, start getting it into the front cabinet. I need to, before I do that actually, need to finish off the wire dress where we've had the board out, get that all back to how it was, and then start getting it in the cabinet, get the woofers and everything connected, and then do a final check of how it sounds. I never actually showed the air damped ejector mechanism, as they call it. It's a really cool little mechanism. It's just got a tiny little kind of fan in the bottom, and when you let go of the lever, it just does that. So there's no grease or anything to worry about. There's no kind of greasy pressure spring or anything like there is on the other mechanisms. I don't think this would take kindly to water getting in it, so you'd still want to remove it when you clean out the casing, but there's just 3 screws hold this whole assembly in. Okay, getting it back into the chassis wasn't without trial. I'll go over some of the pitfalls and bits and bobs that held me up a little bit at a later point, but I'm kind of at the point now of just running it to test it. The back isn't on, it's just running from my bench power supply, and I've just put some screws and spacers in the back just to hold the chassis into the front case. Just picked up a random tape, and it just so happens to have some of my soundtrack work on, so I can play it in the background, no bother. So what I want to do now is just finish off a couple of bits like this, like the tuning knob here. I'm just going to hit this with a little bit of the plastic polish that I use, and see if we can get some of these little spots off it, because otherwise it's not in bad nick at all. Yeah, there's a little bit of muck coming off that. It's because it's got that kind of brushed aluminium effect. Alright, let's see if I can get a convincing before and after, if I've lined the camera up right. All back together, running back off the mains power, no issues, apart from one little one. When I put the pause control in, the tape tends to roll, and I did notice that when I was sort of working on it, and because it's not an adjustable point, it's that the pause, when it pulls the take-up pulley away, it's not quite pulling it away far enough, but it's not really a deal breaker, I don't think. That's the only little bit, but I'm really happy, as I've said, with how the grills and everything have come out. Overall it was in really good shape anyway, but now I've got the tape working, of course, the dial all cleaned, which I'll give you a better shot of in a moment. Just polished up a couple of the controls on the front, but in terms of internally, what it's had is a full clean out, because I don't think it had ever been opened. I think I was the first person in it. Lubrication and new belts and new tyre on the tape deck, new speakers from a donor machine, they've been cleaned and inked, grills from a donor machine that have been stripped with citric acid and then washed and painted with barbecue paint, Rustoleum Barbecue Paint for metal. It's all had to polish up. The aerials and everything were all fine on this one. Not made any changes to the lights or anything like that on this one. But yeah, now it's working from both speakers, of course. Tape deck's all working properly. Radio works. I won't leave that on for copyright, and it's a bit difficult to get, obviously the aerial's up in here, and it's a bit difficult to get reception up here anyway, so won't worry too much about the radio, but it's all working fine. Band switch was also cleaned. In fact, all the switches were cleaned, controls were cleaned. So yeah, not really any outstanding faults other than the tape deck, but just as a general refurbishment, really happy with how that's come out. I may have said earlier about putting screws and spacers in to hold the chassis in. This is my best mistake ever. These little plastic spacers, I picked these up to do another repair and I got the wrong size, but it just so happens that when you've got these Hitachi models where the chassis comes out, you can fix the chassis back into the front cabinet by using the original screws and some of these little spacers. So there'll just be enough to hold it in. If you just put the screws in on their own, they'll go too far into the plastic stems, you know, and they'll damage the plastic. But if you put the spacers in, they'll simulate the spacing of the back cabinet, if that makes sense. So they're really useful things to have when you're working on these. You want to put the cabinet and the chassis, front cabinet, back together. 4 of them will hold it if you need to work on it to connect the speakers or anything, so they're really useful. These are just the screws out of the spares machine. Speaking of the spares machine, the scrapper that I got, I didn't really want to spend money on it. It is what it is. It's in pretty rough shape. In fact, this is the front of it. And I thought it fair to clean it up. I did get some new aerials actually for it. As I said, I didn't want to spend money, but the aerials only cost me about £6, I think. I did put a couple of new aerials on the back cabinet for that one, and I'll probably get a belt set and clean it up, lubricate the tape mechanism, just make it work and pass it back on. I need to get a set of speakers for it. I think the set that I've got available from a previous repair that I did from an 8290, I think, will fit it. They'll have the chrome caps, but they'll fit it. There were some models that were sold with the chrome caps, so it won't look completely out of place. It'll be a beta, but you know, a survivor. So we'll get a few other shots of this and then close up. The bit I always forget, the battery cover. Even if someone's got no intention of running this on batteries, I always like to remove that sponge because it just crumbles and it ends up all inside the machine. And I usually get the tape off by running it under a hot tap, and then you can it kind of softens the glue and you can sort of peel it back with your thumb. Sometimes you have to put a rubber glove on to do it. On this one, that stuff was quite tough and it ended up giving me a blister on my thumb from doing it. But and the last little bit of this foam tape, this draft excluder stuff that I've got, was just a little bit short, but again, I'm happy just to do it anyway, get rid of that old stuff, stick a piece of this on. It just keeps that nice and fresh. Brought it outside to do a test of the radio, just to do a band scan really, and got the aerials right up, and the performance is really impressive.
Very good week, very busy. Sally? Sorry, I'm leaving you to do it. Yeah, no, active space, as he finds peace with the idea. It's a great sort of this one.
So it's every weekday.
And then that was it. She was never seen again.
Tuning needle on the top's really good for finding the strongest point, well obviously, but kind of in use it's really helpful.
Each other from West York. Putting his feet with.
That's right up to the top, so that's picking up plenty of stuff on the radio. The sensitivity is great. You get a good clear station like, you know, classic FM with the carriers really clean.
The scene from Act 2
it's not super noisy at all.
Tchaikovsky, played by the Philharmonia Orchestra under Satu Matthias Ruvali.
Bit of pulp. Anyway, we won't do that for copyright, but let's just switch to the tape. Don't know if I've left anything on. No, I haven't. Rewind a little bit. Well, the rewind, fast forward, and everything's all working great now. There's something. Mono, stereo and wide's working really well. The wide is really interesting. I'll never get that across on this because I've got a mono lav mic, but you kind of have to hear it in person. But a lot of these kind of wide stereo modes on boomboxes are a bit goofy, a bit, you know, gimmicky. But this one kind of interesting, especially, it doesn't work so well outside, but in a room it's quite cool. It sucks a little bit of the bass out, but you can always bring that back up with the bass control. But all sounds great to me. Really nice looking unit. I wish I had room for one. I'll probably keep that scrapper, but yeah, I think I'm going to clean that up and pass it on to someone else. But yeah, really nice looking unit. Really glad I've been able to refurb that and I hope the owner's going to be really happy with it. So I'll call it there. Thanks for watching.